Welcome to my full build series on the B6.4 Team Associated 10 scale buggy. This is going to cover the steering assembly, which is bag 1 in the kit. And just some things to note here. The plastic parts here, they come on a tree, kind of looks like this. And so I've already cut them off of the tree. You'll have to cut them off. I like to use some end cutters. You can come in here like really close to the part and snip it off like so. And then if you do, once you cut it off, if you feel it and there's still a ridge there, then you can come in with a hobby knife and just put this on the table and chop it off either the longitudinal direction or the lateral direction just to get things smoothed up. And so I've already done that. Didn't want to spend time on camera to do that. But these are all ready to go. And then finally there's these little bearings. They give you the whole bearing bag for the whole kit that you're going to use throughout the build. And the 8 bearings for the steering assembly are the smallest ones, and you'll notice there are 2 other ones that are slightly bigger. And these bearings, I believe, are actually for if you got the D version. Those would go in the ball diff. And just to make it easier, they just put the same bearing kit in all their kits. So anyway, for this build, I'm fairly certain that we won't be using those bearings, and so they'll be left over, so don't be alarmed. And if I discover that throughout the build that that's not a true statement, then we'll address that, but I believe those will be 2 extra bearings you don't use. All right, so if we get straight into the build here, the first step you're gonna do is you get this steering rack, and you'll notice it's marked right here with a top, so you know what way the top is. And you're gonna install these bearings as the first step. And if you look at the bearing, one side has a blue rubber shield and the other side has a metal shield. And as a rule of thumb, you're always going to want the blue rubber shield. And whenever you install any bearings, you want them to point out, so they're better resistant to dirt getting in them. And so you point those out. So we're going to stick those bearings in this steering rack like so, and you just kind of push them and make sure they get in there flush. And yeah, we might as well stick the bearings in these bell cranks as well. So same bearing, and the blues are going to go out. So we stick all those bearings in there. Again, pushing them to make sure they go in completely flush. All right, so then the next step here is we're going to install the ball joint here, these balls in there. And you can see there's 3 different sizes. The smallest one goes in here on this inner area hole for the servo. And then the next small size here, which are these here, they go in the actual rack, and then finally these go out on the camber link. All right, so if we put these ball studs on, they have a hex head in the tip of them, which is a 2mm hex driver. And then per the instruction manual, you're going to put these 1mm ball stud washers on them. Just one. And the trick here is the ball stud actually goes on this direction. So this part here, you're going to install it. You can see they're not symmetrical. So looking at the top here, this points away from you and you install this ball stud in like so. And you just want to be really careful to get these in straight. It's kind of a weird angled part, so just check. I like to check from all sides to make sure you get that in straight. And then we screw that one in. We'll finish that off in a minute. Grab the other one and we do the same thing. And they do actually make an optional part for this rack that you can buy in aluminum. Since I'm planning on running a stock buggy, I'm gonna elect to stick with the plastic one, mainly to save weight. They also make these bell cranks in aluminum, and I may upgrade those in the future, but kind of the same thing. Like I typically, for a stock buggy, I stick with plastic just to save weight. But there are other beyond weight. If you're running high traction, which this kit is designed for, sometimes it's nice to have the rigidity of the aluminum just to have a more solid steering feel. So I might try that out and see what I think. Sometimes a little extra weight is okay for performance. Okay, so then we're gonna stick this small ball stud here in the bell crank. If you do end up using the aluminum ones, then you're gonna want to thread lock this in. But you can see this bell crank has two sides to it, and the ball stud goes on the flat side and it goes in the middle hole. And no ball stud washers for that. Let's put that in. And again, always check before you start cranking this thing down that you're getting it in there straight. And you know, when you're going into plastic, you don't have to go crazy tight. You just want to go snug. If you go too tight, you can strip this plastic out, so just be careful. At the same time, you don't want it to be loose. You don't want to see any gaps in between here. Just snug. You can see I'm not straining when I put this in. You just want it snug. All right, so then the next step here is we put this rack on. It actually gets built up like this here. So you can see these, the ball studs point towards the bearings here, and the rack goes below these bell cranks. And you have these little bushings here that you use to install, and there's two options for this. All right, so the next step here, I kind of have this assembly laid out the way it's going to install bell cranks on top, rack top pointing up and on below the bell cranks. And I'm just going to set these bell cranks down, and then is what you're going to end up doing is putting this hat bushing from the bottom side of the rack, so the opposite of where it says top, and push those in. And then these smaller pan head screws also go in from the bottom once you install that hat bushing. And this rack Goes in like so. And you know, I find it easier to install these if you actually pre-thread them before you put them on, because it's just, for me, hard to hold all this and get them straight. So I'll go in and I've already done it, but you can pre-thread these to get them really straight first. And then it makes it much easier to get these installed correctly. And so you just kind of hold everything like so and put it together and just confirm that everything's going in straight. And when you'll want to cinch these down and just confirm when you cinch this down that it's not causing the bearing to tighten up. And if it is, then just crack that screw a hair so it's not tight. But you can see now, bell crank on top, ball studs point towards this bearing on the bell crank, and the top on the rack. And it's really easy to get this all turned around. So then we're going to stick this other bushing in, screw, and do this side here. And just don't forget, if you're going with the aluminum bell cranks, then these holes will already be pre-threaded, and you just need to make sure that the screw doesn't bind up, so you're cross-threading it. Like, they should go in nice and easy. And also you want to use thread lock if you're going in metal screw into aluminum bell cranks. And so again, once you tighten this, just check to make sure everything is free, which they are on mine. And there's the rack and bell crank assembly. So the next part of this is installing this on this bulkhead. And so these actually go in like so. And this is new for the 6.4 kit. You used to just install these, but now you have these little hat bushings, and you can either put the hat bushings on the bottom or on the top. And it allows you to adjust the height of the rack, whereas before on the 6.3 and earlier, you had to actually change these bell cranks to change that offset. And so for this build, most high traction, and it's also the way they tell you to build it in the manual, we're going to put these hat bushings on bottom and run the rack higher, which is essentially +2 millimeters if you're used to the 6.3 or earlier. So we're going to stick these screws in, and it could be helpful to pre-thread these again. This one uses the bigger 2.5 millimeter. But yeah, you're going to stick it on here like so. I just like to start it. And that screw looks like it's in pretty good alignment, so we will crank this down. And just make sure everything's moving. Every time I install something, then I always check to make sure it's free. And if it's not, then you know exactly what has caused it to not be free. And you just try to, you know, generally it's just loosen the screw to make it free, but you'll know exactly where to look and to figure out why something's binding. And again, not going super tight on these screws. Yeah, and everything feels nice and free. You know, it should be able to move with gravity and feel smooth and free. So yeah, the final step here is to put the camber ball studs in. And per the manual, they're putting a 1mm washer, and you know, I'm actually not using the manual setup. I'm using the setup I got from Waylon Rose. I've used Waylon's setups before, and he's always got what works really well for me, so that's where I'm going. And so the manual actually shows you putting this ball, or yeah, the ball stud in the outside hole, but Waylon's got his on the inside, so that is where I'm gonna go, is on the inside here. And again, you just start this and make sure everything looks nice and square, and if it doesn't, adjust it. And then screw it down. And grab this one and do the same thing. And just make sure you're consistent. If you're doing the kit outside, if you're copying me inside. And again, snug, but not crazy tight. You know, these are not like a real car. In fact, the plastic actually helps to prevent things from loosening up. But yeah, just snug is all you need. Anyway, that concludes bag 1 of this build, and I hope you guys found this useful. If you do, please like and subscribe, and wait for the next video for bag 2. Thanks for tuning in.